Good afternoon and welcome to this month's edition of Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships here at Epic, and I will be your host again for today's call. Today's session, Maximizing the Value of Your Client Meetings, is specifically designed for wealth management, advisors, and retirement planning relationship managers, and will address ways to fix the all-important yet often haphazardly executed client meetings. Joining us today to coach you on how to improve your meeting skills and your client satisfaction is Lloyd Poole of Poole Consulting and Training. Lloyd is a former bank manager with more than 35 years of financial industry experience. Mr. Poole began his career in consulting in 1992 and purchased the firm for which he was the senior consultant in 2000 and Trust Compare in late 2007. He then expanded the firm's compliance consulting capabilities with development of the Wealth Management Compliance Alliance in 2014. Lloyd is an accomplished and often requested speaker at industry conferences, and his diverse background within financial services, business focus, and entrepreneurial sales drive had led him to the firm's success in training and consulting. As always, your line will be muted throughout today's presentation, but if you have any questions you'd like us to address at the conclusion, please enter those in the questions panel, and Lloyd will field those for us. Without further ado, Lloyd, take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I look forward to spending this next few minutes with you talking about maximizing the value of your client meetings. I'm sure many of you on the call I am familiar with and vice versa, and I look forward to hearing some feedback from you on the value of this webinar. I do know that Epic will be sending an evaluation link out, or there will be a link at the end, and I look forward to seeing those. Also, after the webinar, you will have access through Epic to a toolkit. As I go through this presentation, there will be a number of forms that are for presentation purposes scrunched onto a PowerPoint page. We will send you or make available to you the actual Word version or Excel version of these forms so that you can use them as you will. So that will be available to you, made available to you after the webinar. This is what we're going to try to accomplish in our few minutes this afternoon. And I do want to say, and the introduction from Brian talked about the point of this webinar. And for those of you that may not be 100% RPS, retirement plan services, or do other wealth advisor work with personal or family wealth customers, 98.5% of what we're going to be talking about could be and often does apply to those type of client relationships also. So even if you're not 100% business to business, I know that we'll be able to provide you some value. I've lifted this a number of years ago. It is so competitive out there right now, particularly in the RPS world. There's a lot of very aggressive competitors, and if we're not managing the relationships, if we're not calling on them, I can pretty much guarantee somebody else is. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about retention calling. We're going to talk a little bit about standards of service and how you segment your clients, and then get into the client meeting. But I want to start with something really simple and really profound. Call programs, retention calls, they seem to develop a life of their own. And it's sometimes useful just to step back and say, no, why are we making these calls? What's the purpose of this? And we like to keep it really simple. It's to keep the business you have and to get more business from those clients. It's as simple as that. There are a myriad of other reasons why you should be making calls. The last bullet point here is what we're going to suggest is the litmus test. You've left a meeting with a client, and you ask yourself, if the rep from principal, if the rep from the other bank, if the rep from the local Raymond James office calls on that client and talks about their ability to provide a 401k solution, will they take the call? Will they take the meeting? Will they entertain that call, or will they politely hang up on that cold calling competitor? For obvious reasons, we call that the litmus test of your relationship. And if you're uncertain of the answer to that question, maybe that's why you're on the call. Maybe that's why you need to revisit your client service, particularly the way you do client meetings. Everybody knows the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle is actually, I think, misspelled on this slide, sorry. But the Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule. And it's been proven over and over again. 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your clients. 80% of the results comes from 20% of the people. That's a truism. 80% of your revenue comes from probably less than 20% of your clients. Lloyd's inverse rule is that 80% of your work comes from 20% of your clients. What makes it the inverse is that it's the wrong 20%. That's a truism in your business. It's a truism in almost every business, that the 80% of the revenue, the 20% of the clients that generate 80% of the revenue aren't necessarily the ones creating the work. We tend to overservice. We tend to respond to the wrong 20% and maybe don't have the time and energy to service the top 20% in the way we should. So the first step is to evaluate your client base and segment your client base. And this is a model. We have versions of this. You all can make up your own. You look at the 3 components. And some organizations actually use 2 components instead of 3. They look at the status. Are they a high-value commercial loan customer? Are they a referral potential? Or are they a difficult client to manage? And then you look at the financial value, the tangible value. Fees is a proxy for profitability. Balances is a less valuable proxy for profitability. But you plug in some tiering for the different fees, and we recommend that be double weighted. And then a lot of organizations will look at the different type of accounts and the personal wealth side, the portability of that account. There can be other factors that you can use to come up with a B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, gold, silver, bronze, platinum, whatever tiering system. I'm not here to focus too much on that, but we do want to emphasize, for some very powerful reasons, that you may not be able to formally deliver the kind of meetings that we're going to be talking about to every client. And obviously, you start at the top. And the way you find the time to do that is you figure out how to lower the cost of service for some of the other clients. As a manager, if you are a manager, if you're looking at it from the department perspective, it's very illuminating every time this is done to look at each officer or each relationship manager and the segmentation within their portfolio. Look who's got the most clients. I will almost guarantee that the ones with the most clients at the top, tier 1 and tier 2, are probably going to be the ones who are the most skilled, have the most relationships, and are better at bringing in new business. But sometimes we don't structure the portfolios to give them the capacity to engage in those kind of behaviors. So this is just a very useful, simple way to look at the segmentation within a department. And this is an example. We'll be sending you or providing you a Excel version of this form. You might notice that we talk about having a 4-tier system, and those maybe from a more retail brokerage background might be more comfortable with an ABC. We find in the typical financial institution, it just works better that to have 4 tiers. It breaks out better. But having said that, if you accept that premise, I'm actually going to tell you there's 6 tiers. A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there's the T-tier accounts, and then there's the franchise clients. Franchise clients are those at the top of the list. They're so big, they're so valuable that they don't, the standards of service that you might define are only a beginning. These are clients that you literally can't afford to lose. These are clients that often have political connections. They're, the bank president is on the board at these organizations, or they're the biggest commercial loan customer, or the family that owns the bank client. So one has to recognize that those exist. And tier 1 clients, the top tier clients, those are different than these franchise clients. The T-tier clients are something that is back to that Lloyd's inverse rule that I think it's important for you to acknowledge. T-tier clients are what we define as targeted for termination or transfer. These are clients that you cannot lower the cost of delivering the service enough to break even. They're just too small. They're not willing to pay the fees, and you need to consciously identify them. Doesn't mean you're going to send them the letter saying go away. You're not going to abuse them. But you may sit down with them and say, you know what, we might have a better idea for how your needs can be met. Maybe this account isn't meeting your needs. And because they're on this list, you don't waive fees. You do not negotiate any kind of fee with these clients. And maybe you enforce a minimum so that you lose less on them. We think it's an important step in the process. Everybody knows you need to know who your top tier clients are, but we think it's valuable to have identified the T-tier clients in your portfolio. This is a standard of service matrix, and again, you'll get a Word version of this, and you can add columns, you can add headers, and talk about how you're going to differentiate the levels of service with the different tiers of clients. Not fancy, you have the contact standards and other service standards at the bottom. Those are things that organizations have used to differentiate. What we're going to be talking about is a subset of those proactive contacts. Typically, there's 2 columns for each of the constituencies: the accounting team, the owner, and the employee committee. And the 2 sub-columns under each of those contacts is calls and meetings. And what we're going to focus today on is on the meetings that you need to have with the clients. And as I mentioned, just to clarify, the challenges in RPS, as you all know very well, are that you have 3 different constituencies. Yes, you have the owner who makes the ultimate decision, but you have the accounting manager, the CFO, the HR person, who is a very important constituency. That person can strongly influence, in many cases, the owner's perception of the relationship. And then for many of your clients, you have an employee committee that needs to be managed. And we're going to suggest you need to be very deliberate in how you manage those relationships and those meetings. I gave you a quick peek at the next slide, but think about establishing standards of service for a Tier 1 client, Tier 2 client, and then looking at how much time it's going to take to do that. And that's what you've got facing you. That's the reality check. You got all these great ideas. You called in on this webinar and got some great ideas on how you're going to handle client meetings going forward. And then you go back to the office and there's 10 emails and 5 files that have to be dealt with and 3 IT security meetings that you've got to go to. And what happens is reality sets in. And one of the things you would want to do as you evaluate your tiering and your standards of service is do an exercise like is shown on this page. How many Tier 1 clients does a person have? How many business meetings and proactive calls do the standards of service suggest? Multiply across, add down, divide by 12, and that's their monthly goal. If that monthly goal looks like that, something coming at you at the window, then maybe you need to revisit your standards of service. Maybe you need to look at how you've allocated accounts amongst your team. We want this process to be practical, to be doable, and you got to make sure that you have the capacity to deliver these services. As a manager, I'm going to introduce another topic, another tool, another piece of the process, and I'm going to hit it relatively quickly. We believe that your Tier 1 clients, certainly your franchise clients, but also your Tier 1 clients, you need to sit down with the manager, the relationship manager, if there's a portfolio manager involved, if there's an Epic representative that works with a client that's involved, you need to sit down. Our recommendation is you need to sit down and go through this relationship review once a year. And sometimes it's part of the pre-call planning process when you're going to be doing a meeting. Some organizations just do it 45 days before the scheduled account review. Some organizations do them all in February. Whatever, they pick a month and they do all of these on an annual basis. It can also be a very useful tool for a manager who is coaching a team of relationship managers. Here's an example of a relationship review checklist. It was customized for a client that does retirement plan services, and you can see the kind of if you look real closely, you can see the kind of questions. The print may be small on your computer. Again, you'll get a Word version of this, so you can see it, and then you can modify it as you choose. When was the last time the executive of the bank was out there? The president of the bank visited this client. Is the client a lending client? If they are you in sync with the loan officer who handles it? Are you documenting this information in the contact management system? Have you discussed the owner's needs beyond the 401k? And you can see some of the other questions there. We commend this to your use. It is a very formal way to do an evaluation of the relationship. I mentioned or talked about we're doing it with a manager. You don't have to be driven by your boss to do this. This is something you could do on your own. Bring the portfolio manager in if there is one. Bring your assistant in if there is such a person. And again, bring the Epic representative if appropriate into this review process. It can be very useful to help you determine what you're going to do to expand the relationship with this client. So we're going to get to it. We're going to talk about this business meeting, and then this slide I popped past a couple of times. It's called a lot of different things. In the financial advisor world, the retail investment world, it's often called the review meeting. We like to call it the annual business meeting, especially in the B2B, business-to-business world. It's a formal meeting, typically annually, that allows you to have a broad conversation with them about the relationship with you, their banking needs, the financial situation, how they feel about the relationship, how they feel about the account. The meeting is scheduled ahead of time, and you make sure you know who's going to be there on both sides, and you create an agenda for that meeting. Let that sink in. You create an agenda for that meeting, and what is not as often done as we think it should be, you send that agenda to the client ahead of time. You send the agenda to the client ahead of time. Think about that for a moment. I'm sure that all of you do some level of meeting, business-oriented, portfolio review, relationship review type meeting with your client. Typically, not very many of you create a formal agenda for that meeting. And typically, very few of you send the agenda to the client ahead of time. And we suggest quite strongly that you add that to your process when you're planning a business meeting with a client. This is a very professional approach to managing the relationship. It is a differentiator. It is different than anybody else will do. It creates great opportunities to expand the relationship because it's an opportunity to discuss things that you might not otherwise discuss. The relationship development component, ethos, pathos, logos, is the EBA components. This builds pathos, it builds ethos, but mostly it builds logos. Logos is logic. It is the Greek word that we've turned into credibility. You want to be perceived as a professional who's on the ball, who's organized. This process will definitely make deposits to the logos component. Not every client, contrary to some people's opinion, is a driver. You have clients who are drivers, you have clients who are analyticals, you have clients who are expressors, and you have clients who are facilitators. And this process is extremely valuable to each of those personality styles. I'm not going to do the time necessary to explain it, but those different styles. But the titles, the labels are somewhat self-explanatory. That driver who wants to get to the business and they love the agenda because it keeps everything on task, and the meeting typically can be done quicker. The analytical loves the meeting because it's organized. And by the way, the analytical is the most likely to email you back and suggest changes to the agenda when they get it ahead of time. The expressor will acknowledge the value of the agenda and the facilitator, but you as the relationship manager need the agenda so that you can keep the meeting on task with those two personality styles. We're going to talk a little bit about how you use the meeting to remind yourself about getting referrals from your customers. When it's on the agenda, you don't forget, and it's a natural way for it to come up in the conversation. I do want to throw in the risk management component. Knowing your client, knowing what's going on in the client's lives, and documenting the above is absolutely critical. I'm switching to a speaker instead of my earpiece. So risk management is a component of that. Here are just whatever templates or scripts for how you might introduce it as a new approach. I'll let you stare at this for a moment. And again, you'll get a more visible version of this, and you can peel out the ones that you like if you feel you need to equip your team or for yourself to be better at introducing this approach. This is what the email to the client might look like. Certainly a confirmation, very professional thing to do. A little bit of outline of what we're going to try to accomplish. And the important sentence is, if there are questions you have or issues you wish to address, please call or email me right away so I can amend the agenda to be prepared to address your questions. We will tell you, I am telling you that the first cycle you do this with your clients, there will be a few analytical type clients that will email you right away with some suggestions. There might be some clients that are very unhappy about something specific, or they're unhappy about something specific, or have very specific questions who might email you right away. But most of your clients, the first go around, will not respond to this email. The second cycle, the second year, the second cycle you do this, the number of clients that will respond will double because they understand it, they understand the process. I'm going to show you some agendas in a minute, but I want to stay here for a second and suggest to you what we have found, what feedback has come back to us is when you create the agenda or customize the agenda for the meeting, put it on a Word document with your logo and your maybe letterhead and maybe PDF it, and attach a separate document to this email. You might be tempted to embed the agenda in this email. Number one, it's not quite as formal, but more importantly, and I'm not sure I can explain why, but what our clients are telling us is if there's a attachment, a document attached, the client is more likely to open it up, print it out, and bring it along to the meeting. So again, variations on a theme, some people have embedded agendas in the email, but we recommend against it. Okay, so, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to lean towards the computer to see the agenda because of the size of the font. You'll get a Word version of this. If you note that there's the left justified items and then there's the indented items, typically the agenda that goes to the client is the left justified bullet points. You may or may not use the indented bullet points when you send the agenda. You take this agenda and you save it on the common drive or on your desktop. You pop it open when you're planning this, scheduled the call. It takes you a couple of minutes at most to customize the agenda to the needs of the client, to that you know, save it, PDF it, and send it out. We're talking just a few minutes of extra work and huge payback for that investment. You might note at the bottom, the second to the last question, who do you know that has similar circumstances? This one, the one that's on the screen, says Trust Advisory Investment. It's more designed for the personal wealth client. This is one that was used by a client, is used by a client for the RPS, the owner of the company. And you can see how they've laid it out. Again, they suggest, and we suggest, you may or may not use the indented bullet points in the agenda that goes to the clients. And you can see that the second to the last question on this form is a little bit more specific. What other business owners do you know? Okay. The next one is for the meeting with the administrator. And we know that sometimes there's not three constituencies. Sometimes the owner is the administrator. I certainly acknowledge that. But showing you three different agendas for each of those type of folks. If your owner is the administrator, then you might mush together these agendas. And again, you can see the layout is not that different, but does have some different bullet points, items, and language in this agenda. And then this is an example of an agenda for an employee committee. You're going to have that meeting with the employee committee. You're going to follow up on the things that came up the last time. You're going to review the participation. You're going to review the investment options. You're going to ask how we're doing. We're going to see if there's anything new in the employee needs and concerns. So you can see four, but in the RPS world, three different constituencies, three different agendas. And again, it's as simple as I described. You put them on the common drive. They're Word documents. You open them up, put the client's name at the top, save it. It's a very quick, and it becomes quite routine to be able to formalize the client meetings with your customers using these agendas and sending them out ahead of time. And I think I've said this 3 times, sorry. You'll get the Word version of these documents after the webinar from Epic. One of the last formal things I want to present is just you can call it what you want. I'm going to call it a diatribe about pre-call planning. And one of the most haphazard parts of most organizations' meetings is the lack of pre-call planning. And our mantra, our approach, our suggestion is the bigger the deal, the bigger the relationship, the more people involved on either side of the table, the more people on the client side, the more people on the service side that are going to be involved in the meeting, the more important it is to do good pre-call planning. And I want to hasten to say that good pre-call planning is not done in the car on the way to the appointment. Although I acknowledge that that's where it often happens, that's not the best time and place to do the pre-call planning. Because as a result of pre-call planning, you might tweak the agenda, you might think of things you need to take along, and when you're already in the car, it's a little late. So pre-call planning is, we believe, very important. And I briefly mentioned syncing up service with the commercial lender. I might have mentioned that, some of these high-value clients, you might have a bank executive or a department executive in the meeting, and that just makes it even more important to do pre-call planning so that you can try to control what happens in that meeting by making sure everybody knows what their role is and where they are expected to chime in. So pre-call planning
Again, you got a word version of this, but it's not that complicated. Most organizations do not necessarily use a form and write down the answers, but I do know that a number of organizations that we work with use something like this or this one as a checklist for their pre-call planning meeting, making sure they've asked the right questions, addressed the right things, and prepared for the meeting most effectively. And by the way, depending on your model, your staffing model, we would strongly recommend you involve, if you have them, your administrative assistant or sales assistant or whoever might be interacting with the client in addition to you, the relationship manager. Sometimes they have great insight into what's going on in the client and some of the things that you should be prepared for. So, my diatribe about pre-call planning. You can read this. It's all about that relationship with the client. It's all about calling on the client, focusing on meeting more of their needs, reinforcing the value of your relationship with that client. And you got to love it. This is just one of the kind of a wrap-up point. You've got to love this job, because if you don't, it shows. I'll put it another way. Doing these kind of meetings, doing this kind of formal service is too hard to do if you're not enjoying it. It can be the fun part of the job. It often is the fun part of the job, and you need to approach it like that, not as a administrative burden. It's the fun part of the job. I've already mentioned the toolkit will be emailed or made available. I'm not sure what Chris will do. I think he'll email it to the participants. And the evaluation seminar, we don't know how you're reacting because we can't see your faces. So feedback through the evaluation is very important to us, and we would ask you to take a moment to do so. I understand it's a rather brief evaluation, which is good. And then if, of course, if anything I can do to help, please feel free to contact me. We can help actually build this infrastructure if you would be interested in that help. So with that, I turn it back to Brian to share any questions that might have come up from the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lloyd. Great insights and helpful reminders in some cases of really how we should be handling this. In respect for everyone's time, since we ran a little bit over, you know, the themes I got out of it were hearing, agenda, and planning. Lloyd, do you have any kind of final comments to add? We'll wrap up for the day.
No, I do not. Thank you all for participating.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate your time, and thank you, Lloyd. We'll look forward to seeing everyone on a future webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.